The sound of knuckles rapping against his apartment door at 9:37 p.m. was the last thing Mark expected on a Tuesday night. His 6-year-old daughter Emma had finally fallen asleep after 3 bedtime stories, 2 glasses of water, and 1 solemn promise to check for monsters under the bed. When he opened the door to find his boss, Vanessa Chen, standing in the hallway, mascara smudged beneath her eyes and a manila folder clutched in her white-knuckled grip, he knew something was terribly wrong. "You're fired," she said, her voice cracking on the second word. If you're wondering how a hardworking single father ended up losing his job while standing in his doorway wearing Star Wars pajama pants, or why his normally composed boss was fighting back tears on his welcome mat, stick around. This story might just change the way you think about second chances, missed signals, and what really matters in life. If you find yourself connecting with Mark's journey, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel for more stories that remind us of our shared humanity. Mark Reynolds hadn't always been a single dad juggling spreadsheets by day and bedtime routines by night. 3 years ago, he'd been half of what his friends called a power couple. He managed accounts at Chen Innovations while his wife Olivia built her career as a pediatric surgeon. They had plans, dreams, a future mapped out in careful detail. Then came the rainy Tuesday when Olivia's car hydroplaned on the highway. The police officer who knocked on his door that night had worn the same expression Vanessa wore now, a mixture of dread and determination. "I don't understand," Mark said, his hand gripping the doorframe. "Is this about the Westfield account? I know I missed the deadline, but... May I come in?" Vanessa asked, her professional demeanor reasserting itself despite the obvious distress in her eyes. Mark glanced back toward Emma's bedroom door, adorned with crayon drawings and a glittery purple sign spelling her name. "She's asleep," he said. "Can we talk quietly?" Vanessa nodded and stepped inside, her heels clicking softly against the hardwood floor. The apartment wasn't large, a 2-bedroom unit in a modest complex that had become home after selling the house he and Olivia had bought together. Too many memories in those walls. Too much empty space. The living room told the story of Mark's life now, toys scattered across the coffee table, a half-finished spreadsheet open on his laptop, a pile of unfolded laundry on the couch. A life interrupted, constantly. "I'm sorry about the mess," he said automatically, clearing a stack of coloring books from the armchair so Vanessa could sit. She remained standing, clutching the folder to her chest like armor. "Mark, this isn't just about the Westfield deadline." In the kitchen, the digital clock on the microwave blinked 9:42 p.m. Mark had been planning to finish reviewing the quarterly projections after this rare moment of quiet. Now, with his boss standing in his living room pronouncing his career dead, those projections seemed absurdly unimportant. "Then what is it about?" he asked, feeling a familiar tightness in his chest, the same sensation he'd experienced when the doctor had explained there was nothing they could do for Olivia. Vanessa sighed and finally sank into the armchair. "It's about the last 6 months, Mark. The missed meetings. The incomplete reports. The times you've left early without explanation. The client calls you haven't returned." Each accusation landed like a physical blow. Mark wanted to defend himself, to explain that every missed meeting coincided with a school emergency, that reports remained incomplete because he fell asleep at his desk after midnight feedings and early morning nightmares, that he left early because the after-school program ended at 5:30 sharp and charged $1 per minute for late pickups he couldn't afford. Instead, he said, "I've been trying my best." "I know," Vanessa replied, her voice softening. "That's why this is so difficult." She opened the folder and pulled out a sheet of paper. Mark expected a termination notice, but instead saw a performance improvement plan with his name at the top. "I've been trying to talk to you about this for weeks," she continued. "I've sent emails asking for meetings. I've left notes on your desk. I even tried to catch you in the break room, but you're always rushing somewhere." Mark's mind raced through recent weeks, suddenly recalling Vanessa's attempts at conversation that he'd brushed aside with quick promises to catch up later. The emails marked important that remained unread in his inbox. The yellow sticky notes he'd swept into his drawer without reading. "I didn't realize," he said, the inadequacy of those words hanging in the air between them. "Clearly," Vanessa replied, a hint of frustration breaking through her professional veneer. "Which is why I finally decided to come here. Because if you can't see what's happening at work, maybe you'd understand if I showed up at your door." Mark sank onto the couch, pushing aside a stuffed unicorn and a half-eaten package of crackers. "So, am I actually fired?" Vanessa ran a hand through her normally immaculate bob, revealing a vulnerability Mark had never seen in his boss before. "That depends on you." The silence stretched between them, broken only by the soft hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of a car alarm several blocks away. "I started this company 12 years ago," Vanessa finally said. "Did you know that?" Mark shook his head. Despite working at Chen Innovations for 5 years, he realized he knew surprisingly little about its founder. "I was 26, fresh out of business school, and everyone told me I was crazy to leave my corporate job." A small smile played at the corner of her mouth. "My parents were immigrants who worked themselves to the bone so I could have opportunities they never did. They couldn't understand why I'd throw away a secure position to chase some entrepreneurial dream." Mark found himself leaning forward, momentarily forgetting his own precarious situation. The first 2 years were brutal, Vanessa continued. I worked 18-hour days. Lived on ramen and coffee. Pitched to investors who looked right through me. But I believed in what I was building, a company that would value innovation and people equally. She fixed her gaze directly on Mark. When I hired you, I saw someone with that same drive. Your analysis of the Brookfield proposal was brilliant. You found solutions no one else had considered. Olivia used to joke that you could see patterns in chaos. The mention of his late wife's name made Mark's breath catch. Few people at work ever mentioned Olivia anymore, as if her death had made her name taboo. After she died, Vanessa said gently, I watched you try to hold everything together. I admired how you showed up every day, even when I could see you were barely sleeping. I gave you space, time, flexibility, everything I could, because I believed you'd find your footing again. Mark felt a hot sting behind his eyes. I thought I was hiding it better, he admitted. You weren't, Vanessa said simply. But lately, it's not just about grief anymore. You're drowning, Mark. And you're too stubborn or too proud to admit it. The truth of her words hit him with unexpected force. He was drowning, in responsibilities, in guilt, in the constant fear that he was failing his daughter, his job, his wife's memory. The company is growing, Vanessa continued. We've taken on bigger clients with higher expectations. I need my senior account managers fully present, and you haven't been for months. So I am fired, Mark concluded, a strange numbness spreading through him. No, Vanessa said firmly. Not yet. But I need you to make a choice. She placed the performance improvement plan on the coffee table between them. Option 1, you commit to this plan. Regular check-ins, measurable goals, no more missed deadlines. You find a way to balance your responsibilities at work with your responsibilities at home. Mark stared at the document, the corporate language blurring before his eyes. And option 2? Vanessa pulled a second document from her folder. A different role. Fewer clients. More predictable hours. A 20% pay cut. The financial implications of that pay cut flashed through Mark's mind immediately, the careful budget he maintained, the childcare costs, the medical bills still arriving from Olivia's final days. Why would you offer me that? He asked, genuinely confused. Why not just replace me with someone who can do the job properly? Vanessa's expression softened. Because good people are worth investing in, even when they're struggling. Because I've been where you are, maybe not as a parent, but I know what it's like to have your world collapse and still have to show up the next day. For the first time, Mark noticed the dark circles under Vanessa's eyes, partially concealed by makeup but visible in the harsh overhead lighting of his apartment. What happened to you? He asked before he could stop himself. A sad smile crossed her face. That's a story for another time. Tonight is about your future with the company. Mark glanced toward Emma's bedroom door, thinking of the little girl sleeping peacefully beyond it, unaware that her father's professional life was imploding. I can't take a pay cut, he said finally. Emma's school, her therapy, the apartment, I've calculated everything down to the dollar. Vanessa nodded, unsurprised. Then you need to commit to the improvement plan. Fully commit, Mark. No more half measures. And if I can't? Then yes, you're fired. The bluntness of her statement was tempered by genuine regret in her eyes. I've extended every professional courtesy I can. The board is questioning my judgment for keeping you on this long. Mark ran his hands through his hair, the reality of his situation finally sinking in. I didn't realize it had gotten this bad. That's part of the problem, Vanessa said. You haven't been present enough to notice. The accusation stung because it was true. Mark had been operating on autopilot for months, moving from one crisis to the next without ever lifting his head to see the bigger picture. I need your decision by Friday, Vanessa said, standing and smoothing her skirt. Take the next 2 days to think about it. Really think, Mark. About what you want and what Emma needs. As she moved toward the door, Mark found his voice again. Why come here tonight? Why not just call me into your office tomorrow? Vanessa paused, her hand on the doorknob. Because I've tried the professional approach for weeks and you weren't hearing me. Sometimes people need to be shocked out of their patterns. She hesitated, then added more softly, and because I thought you deserved to hear this in private, not in a glass-walled office where everyone could watch. The consideration behind that decision, a kindness Mark hadn't expected, left him momentarily speechless. Thank you, he managed finally. For not giving up on me yet. Vanessa nodded once, her professional mask firmly back in place. Friday, Mark. I need your answer by end of day. After she left, Mark stood in the silent apartment, the performance improvement plan lying on his coffee table like a bomb waiting to detonate. He moved to the kitchen and poured himself a glass of water, trying to process what had just happened. His phone buzzed with a text message. Expecting Vanessa with some final thought, he was surprised to see his neighbor Diane's name instead. Everything okay? Saw your boss leaving. Kind of late for a work visit. Mark stared at the message, realizing how the scene must have appeared to his elderly neighbor across the hall, a woman in business attire leaving his apartment at nearly 10 p.m. He typed back a quick response, "Work emergency. All good now. Thanks for checking." Was it all good, though? Mark leaned against the counter, suddenly exhausted. The performance improvement plan would require energy and focus he wasn't sure he possessed anymore. But the alternative, a significant pay cut, would mean difficult sacrifices for both him and Emma. A small sound from the hallway made him turn. Emma stood in her doorway, rubbing her eyes, her favorite stuffed elephant dragging on the floor beside her. "Daddy?" I heard voices. Mark crossed the room and knelt before his daughter, brushing a strand of hair, so like Olivia's, from her forehead. "Just a work friend, sweetheart. Everything's okay." Emma studied his face with the uncanny perception of children. "You look sad." "Not sad," Mark said, forcing a smile. "Just thinking about grown-up stuff." "Like taxes?" Emma asked seriously, making Mark laugh despite himself. "Even more boring than taxes," he assured her, scooping her up. "Let's get you back to bed." As he tucked Emma in for the second time that night, Mark found himself studying her face, the constellation of freckles across her nose, the determined set of her jaw even in sleep. She was the best of Olivia and the best of him, resilient in ways he couldn't fathom. "I'm trying, Liv," he whispered to the empty room, a habit he'd developed in the months after the funeral. "I'm really trying." Back in the living room, Mark picked up the performance improvement plan and began to read it properly. The objectives were clear, the expectations reasonable for someone fully focused on their career. For a single parent struggling to hold everything together, they seemed nearly impossible. He opened his laptop and pulled up his calendar, scanning the coming weeks. Emma had a dentist appointment next Tuesday, a parent-teacher conference the following Thursday, and her weekly therapy session every Friday afternoon. The school spring concert was approaching, and he'd promised to help make costumes. Each commitment represented another potential conflict with work expectations. Mark rubbed his eyes, feeling the weight of competing responsibilities pressing down on him. He'd been so focused on surviving day to day that he'd lost sight of the bigger picture, at work and at home. His gaze fell on a framed photo on the bookshelf, taken on Emma's 4th birthday. Olivia was still alive then, her arm around Mark's waist, both of them laughing as Emma blew out her candles with such force that frosting had splattered across the table. They'd been happy, secure in the belief that they had decades of birthdays ahead of them. Life had other plans. Mark closed his laptop and moved to the window, looking out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, Vanessa was driving home, perhaps wondering if she'd made the right decision in giving him one last chance. He wondered what struggles she carried that she kept hidden behind her professional exterior. The realization that he knew so little about the woman who had been his boss for 5 years struck him as emblematic of his larger problem. He'd been so wrapped up in his own grief and challenges that he'd stopped seeing the people around him, their needs, their expectations, their humanity. That had to change, starting now. Mark returned to the coffee table and picked up his phone. He opened his calendar app and began blocking out time, not just for Emma's appointments and school events, but for focused work on each client account. He set reminders for deadlines, created a system for prioritizing tasks, and most importantly, scheduled regular check-ins with Vanessa. It was nearly midnight when he finally finished. The plan wasn't perfect, but it was a start, an acknowledgement that something had to change if he wanted to keep his job and his sanity. As he prepared for bed, Mark felt a strange sense of relief beneath the anxiety. Vanessa's late-night visit had been a wake-up call, forcing him to confront realities he'd been avoiding for months. Whether he could actually meet the expectations in the improvement plan remained to be seen, but at least now he was facing the challenge head-on. The next morning arrived too quickly, with Emma bouncing on his bed at 6:15 a.m., full of energy and questions about breakfast options. Mark moved through their morning routine on autopilot, cereal for Emma, coffee for himself, a frantic search for a missing shoe that eventually turned up in the refrigerator. "I was seeing if it would get cold, Daddy." As he walked Emma to the bus stop, his mind kept returning to the performance improvement plan waiting on his coffee table. The first item required him to complete the Westfield report by end of day today, a task he'd been putting off for nearly a week. "Daddy, you're squeezing my hand too tight," Emma complained, pulling him back to the present. "Sorry, pumpkin," Mark said, loosening his grip. "Daddy's thinking about work stuff." Emma nodded sagely. "Ms. Chen looked worried when she left last night." Mark stopped walking. "You saw her?" "I peeked," Emma admitted. "She looks different without her work face on." "Her work face?" Mark repeated, bemused by his daughter's observation. Emma scrunched up her features in an exaggerated stern expression that was surprisingly accurate. "Like this. But last night she looked sad, like when Jesse's mom came to get her from my birthday party early." Mark marveled at his daughter's perceptiveness. He'd worked with Vanessa for years and had rarely seen beyond her professional demeanor. Emma had glimpsed something in a momentary peek that he'd missed entirely. "Well, grown-ups have tough days sometimes," Mark said as they reached the bus stop where other children and parents were.